Hi all, I'm Sajid Giganage. Today I'm going to conduct a second lesson of Angular tutorial series. In this lesson, we are mainly discussing the basics of Angular, like Angular components, overview, Angular lifecycle, and some property binding techniques. Here's the outline of the course. Let's see about Angular components. Angular components are the main building block of Angular application. Each building box contains its behaviors, template details, CSS styles, metadata, and all things related to this so-called building box. After using several building boxes, we can create complex Angular applications. So we can say it as an Angular app contains a tree of Angular components. Let's see some examples. You can see the picture on the screen and consider this as a web template. You may all familiar with this kind of web template. Then consider each section which has similar color. Try to identify header which is in green color, right navigation panel, and menu buttons which are in light blue, and item widgets which are in dark blue. We can use a separate component for this header. It means it means all behaviors, views, and all relevant details about the header are in the header component. It is the same for the site navigation bar here. Then in Angular, almost all components are reusable. Consider the light blue color three buttons here. All those three have similar behaviors. Normally, when we get a website, this button has click events and name, and same has all three has same behaviors. Then we can create one component called menu button component and reuse that component for all these three buttons by changing or injecting their properties. Uh, for example, if this is a home button and this is a let's say a contact us or something, and this is about us button, all this has click event and also the name. And we can create one particular component called menu button component, and by injecting particular name and event to this component, we can reuse the functionality of that component in three instances like in the image. Like that, six widget below in the dark blue buttons can also is a reusable component. We can create one widget called, let's say, item widget, then reuse it in uh, for all these six widgets. Uh, you can further understand those components and reusability of those components when we use this in a while. Let's consider code level behavior of these components. Each of these components consists of four main things. You have to understand this. For a component, the number one is there is an HTML template that declares what renders on the page. That means if you put a component on a web template, this HTML template of the component describes what should render the DOM there. And also, as a second part, there's a TypeScript class that defines the behavior. All our behavior and some metadata are defined in this TypeScript class. And uh, one important thing, this is a important thing, a CSS selector that defines how the component is used in a template. if we consider a web template, if we are going to use some kind of web component in a web template, this CSS selector is the property to identify the HTML tag. You will see it in the while we are going to code. Optionally, we can have CSS styles applied to the template. Let's see how to create an Angular component. The easiest way to create a component is with Angular CLI. From terminal window, navigate to your directory contain your application, and just you have to write this command and press enter. Then it will create component automatically. And you could create component by manually. In this tutorial, we will go through these two ways. First thing first, the easy one. Let's see how to create a Angular component with Angular CLI. This is the application where we created in our lesson 1, and you can see the folder structure, source and app. I will here is my terminal. If you are unable to get this terminal in Visual Code, just go down here and drag to up. Click and drag to up, and the terminal appears here. And I'm going to the folder source app folder. And one more important thing, in this application, when we creating this Angular application, this app component.css, app component.html, app component.ts, app component.spec.ts, and app.module.ts, these files are automatically created if you remember it. Then just ignore this app.module.ts and look at this app.component.css and other 4 file which has the prefix with app.component. This is our root component. When we create an Angular application, it automatically create root component as app component. And as I mentioned in my presentation, you can identify some properties inside these files. For example, if I go to the app.component.ts, you can identify the selector and template URL and style URLs and classes and things. We will discuss this in later after creating our own component. This web template. I'm going to create the header component which represent the green color. Then my command is ng generate component, then my component name. My component name is header. Yes, I'm not normally I can since this is a component. If you think to write it as a header component, don't do this, because when Angular CLI creating the TypeScript class, it automatically add the component postfix to the class name. So if you execute the command like this, ng generate component header component, Angular CLI will add another component postfix here. So just use the component name only. Then ng generate component header. I will click enter. While it now it's created, and you can see here in the app folder, there's another folder called header. So now we created our first component called header component, and I will demonstrate how to use this header component in our Angular application. Before that, let's go to our root component, which is our app component, and uh, click on app component.ts file, and you can identify the CSS selector. It's in line 4, and I will explain these things in detail later, but for now just see the selector property here. It called app-root. Then this says for our root component, which is app component, for app component, app root is the CSS selector. This selector instructs Angular to initiate this component whenever it finds the corresponding tag in HTML template. When Angular application is loading, it loads the index.html. If you see the index.html file carefully, look at the line number 11. In here, you can find there's a HTML tag called approved. This is same as the value here. Now you can see what is the benefit of having the CSS selector. Then let's go to our, before going forward, I will run this application and this and click enter. Now this application will run in shortly, and while it's running, let's go to our header component TS. If you see carefully in our header component, the CSS selector, which is in selector property, is app header. Now, if you understood what is the purpose of CSS selector, you should know now to render this app component in the DOM, you have to use this app header as HTML tag. This is the application we created in lesson 1. After we create in our header component, let's inspect the header component.html. In our HTML file, there's a paragraph tag and value as a header words. But in our application, this value is not appeared here, but we have to add it. How? Now, we have to use this value as a HTML tag, and we know now the app component is rendering. If we use, since this is going to be a header, I will add the top of the page and I will paste it as a HTML tag and save. Now it compiled again. Let's see what happened. Now you can see the header words text appears here. Then you can understood what happened here. Let's go to the inspect elements and check what is the rendered DOM is. In the body tag, there's a approved tag. In the approved, there's a app header and other our header tags also. To see clearly in app header, it load the header words paragraph in here. That means if we want to use our Angular component in HTML template, we have to specify our CSS selector as HTML tag. Okay, now you know how to create an Angular component, how to use it. Okay, for better understanding, now we will move to the way to create Angular component by manually. I will give you a tip here, that is, You can what we write to create a header component is ng generate component and component name header. Okay. Since there's lot of typo, uh, I will give you a shortcut code to create a Angular component. It's just ng again, and for generate use G only, and for the component use C only. Then this says ng generate component in shorthand, and then the component name. I will create it as a navbar. Since my HTML template has header navigation bar, so it is as navbar and press enter. Now you can see the navbar component also created here. Okay, if you want to use the navbar component in my HTML file, you have to do just copy this CSS selector value and paste it here. Then go to the HTML tag and see there's the navbar. Okay, now we have created two components using Angular CLI. Now let's move to the our next part of the lesson to create Angular component by manually. First of all, uh, as steps, I'll explain this at steps. You have to navigate to your Angular project directory and create folder name for your folder named as your Angular component. Now I am going to create our menu button component, and I will add a folder here, menu button, and under this folder I will create my component class, that is a new file, menu button.com component.ts. In this component class, you have to import our component decorator. For that, I will write the import statement, import component from, I will go to import this from Angular core module. For this okay. Now after importing the component decorator, we have to use it, and this is component here. Then our class name, what class, and our class name is menu button component. Class created. Okay. Component decorator. This component decorator make a class as an Angular component. Without this decorator, this class is just a class. To make this class a Angular component, we have to add this decorator. And this decorator also we use to provide some configuration metadata and determines how the component should be processed uh, and initiated and used at runtime and so on. And this component decorator is inherit from the directive decorator. We will discuss about directive decorator later in another lesson. And uh, sometimes you may heard about Angular components are also a Angular directive. Yes, it is true. This component decorator is inherited from the decorator called directive, and component directive especially have a template, HTML template. We will discuss it in later. For now, for create, now we have to configure this component decorator. For that, we have to add the our CSS selector. As we see in previous example, to use Angular component, we need the CSS selector. My command is I'll add the selector for here and as app menu button. Now selector has added. As I mentioned earlier, every component requires a CSS selector, and this selector instructs Angular to initiate this component whenever it finds the corresponding tag in HTML template. For example, if we get component app menu button, we have to reuse it in 3 times as template describes earlier. And so to initiate those 3 instances, we have to add the CSS selector in relevant HTML template. Now we have to define the HTML template. For that, first I create a new file again called menubutton.com. This is my HTML file. Then I will add a template URL as the complete here. Template URL. If you see there's a template and template URL, first use template URL. I'll explain what is template again and mention the file. Okay. Now the template URL also added. For this particular component, the template is defined in this file. Then, while defining the template, a template a template is a HTML block that tells Angular how to render the component in your application, and you can define this HTML template in 2 ways. First one is defining the template as an external file, which is I have done short before. And other thing is you can define the template within the component. I'll show how to do it here. If I want to define my HTML template within the component, I can comment out this code and use the template. And we can define template here. Let's say h1 hello world or menu button. Menu button, let's say it's home and h1. Now, like this, we can define the HTML template. And if your HTML template has multiple lines, uh, I use here in a single quote, you can see Single quote is not valid for multiple line HTML code. So for multiple lines, you can create backticks here. Use the template as for this template is not needed, but for example, I have click here. This is how to create the HTML template in the component itself, but it is better to use a separate file as mentioned earlier because it is more maintainable. So I keep this external file configuration and comment out other thing. And the other thing is select a style for the component template. In most cases, you define the style for your component template in separate file like HTML does. And I will show it. Before show it, I'll create a new file called menu button dot component dot css, and then I'll add the style URL as separate file. The important thing is this property is an array, string array. That means you can define several style files by using this configuration. Menu button dot component dot css. Okay, by adding command you can add another css if you want. And the other ways defining style URL is like we did in the for the HTML template. We can define CSS directly within the component. I will show how to do it. Styles. I will comment out this. And also it's a array. I will add a class property, add CSS here for h1. I will add like font weight. No. We can use styles in these two ways, as external file or component itself. It's also better used as separate files. It is maintainable, as you know. Now our component is creating is almost done. I have exported the class and I have added all decorator configurations. I will delete this commented out things and save. Now we have to do very important thing, that is a component must be on to an ng module. For in order to it to be available to another component or application, it need to belong to an ng module. Then what about pre-created Angular component? If you see this log below here, you can see navbar component is created. While this creating, there's four files as created and one file mentioned it as update. It's called app.module is updated. What it says, when we go to the app.component, sorry, app.module.ts, in this module, there's a decorator called ng module. Under that decoration, there's a configuration declarations array, and inside the declaration arrays, our three pre-created components are there: app component, header component, and navbar component. And if we want to use our manually created component in this application belong to this ng module, I have to declare that component here. So I will add here by copying this class name here, and we have to import it. I'll use the easiest way to import it. Now our components manually created. Let's see, is it working now? For menu button component, our CSS selector is app menu button. Let's see what will happen if we added this to the here. And I add here, but I forgot something. I have nothing added here in our HTML block. So we have to add something here. H1 tag and as a home. And I will save it. Now you can see that's not. Let's stop this and run again. Now that button list appears here. The firstly, the thing is, when we manually added some declaration to our modules, it not automatically refreshed. That's the problem here. Then I stop and run the application again, and it appears there. And I will show how to reuse this menu button component uh, in the app component. Just what I have to do is just add this tag 3 times, and you can see now our all created components are there. Header components is there, navbar components is there, and 3 instances of our menu button components is there. I will delete this. Okay, now we discuss about how to create Angular component using Angular CLI and also by manually. Okay, now you know how to create an Angular component. I'll stop this video from here and I will continue lesson 2 as the part 2 from another video. In that video, I'm going to discuss about how to bind CSS styles and how to bind properties to the components. Thank you.